let's get into the quarterback position, talk about 4 players you are encouraging the people to add here. Although I will definitely point to the second player on this list. Pretty interesting little quarterback down there in New Orleans there, Justin Boone. But anyways, take it away. Who are the 4 players people should add this week at quarterback?
I started giving you your props last week on this one. We will definitely continue this week. But starting with these 4, Sam Darnold at the Panthers. He's just over that 50% rostered mark. A top 10 fantasy quarterback in 2 of the last 3 weeks. We just saw him accomplish that feat against the Rams, which is a tough matchup. So he can definitely do it against Carolina. Though also they're kind of a tricky opponent for fantasy quarterbacks. The one that you want to talk about is Tyler Shuck, and he gets another good matchup here against the Titans. He looks comfortable in this offense, Harmon. And I think now we can look at this guy. Even last week, I was still kind of pushing back on the idea that he was going to be the week 1 starter next year. I was wrong. Yeah, he looks like he deserves to be the week 1 starter next year. And I don't know if they'll even need to bring in competition because, he looks good in this offense. And you think about it, like, despite having Rashid Shaheed traded away at the deadline, despite having Alvin Kamara hurt and Devon Vele hurt, he keeps putting up these pretty decent performances in real life and in fantasy over the last month, right? He's finished as the QB 12, the QB 6, the QB 16, and he currently sits as the QB 14 with just Monday Night Football left to be played. So, those numbers don't mean he has to be like a must add off the waiver wire, but he is certainly a guy that you can grab and start this week if you have any concerns about the guy that you're playing. And then the other ones we don't really need to talk about here. JJ McCarthy playing the Lions. We're going to have to check on his health all week and whether he's going to be able to go in that game, but we've seen him have a couple good performances fantasy wise and the matchup's all right. And then, we're really digging deep if we're talking about Geno Smith playing the Giants, but the matchup is good and Geno had a bit of a better game this week. So maybe he can come through in an easy spot there.
In a revenge game for Geno Smith. Never forget that Geno Smith
was the one
to break Eli Manning's start streak.
I feel like I did. I'm always about the revenge games. I feel like I did forget about that. Wow, yeah. Good call.
I don't think anybody could blame you if you forgot about the storied Geno Smith New York Giants era. Let's get to the running back position here. Anybody worth adding as we head into week 17?
Yeah, I think all these guys are kind of interesting. We're going to talk about Michael Carter again, and I know we talked about him last week, and he really didn't come through. But this week, he gets the Bengals. So the 65 scoreless yards last week, it wasn't what we wanted, but don't hold that against them because this matchup against Cincinnati is fantastic. They're going to have the most fantasy points to running backs, including at least 100 scrimmage yards or a touchdown to 6 different backs over the last 4 weeks. So they're just hemorrhaging fantasy points to running backs. I think you could go back to Carter here as an RB2 in fantasy. Blake Corum, he plays the Falcons. We know how good he's been, even though he's still kind of playing that complementary role behind Kyron Williams, but he's finished as a top 20 RB in 4 consecutive outings here. He's found the end zone 5 times during that span, and he's posted yardage totals at 81, 131, 71, and 61. I don't know why they all end in ones, but they are all good for fantasy. You are happy to have him in your lineup as a high-end RB3 with RB2 upside. Emmanuel Wilson, we'll go back to that conversation that we had earlier talking about Josh Jacobs. Will Josh Jacobs continue to play through this? Will the Packers actually sit him down, which I think at this point would be the smart move? Either way, we saw Jacobs out there this week, and we saw them eventually give the touches to Wilson, and we saw Wilson come through with over 80 yards. And I mentioned that stat earlier where he's had 4 games where he's played at least 40% of the snaps. He's performed well fantasy-wise in all of them. So if he gets that opportunity, he's going to be in your lineup as an RB2. I think you want to pick him up and stash him. And then we saw Quinshon Judkins get hurt this week, so that opens up an opportunity in the Browns backfield. Dylan Sampson wasn't even able to practice last week. We'll see if he's able to get out there and practice this week. He would be the guy to stash if he can play. If he can't go, then Raheem Rocket Sanders is the guy you could look at as the early down back there. Travion Williams would be the passing down back. That would kind of cap those guys because Sampson's someone who can come in and actually could consolidate all of it. We've seen him do that a couple times this year where he's gotten more opportunities, including going back to week 1 before Judkins had signed his contract. So Sampson, a guy to stash. If you really need to go deep and you're really desperate, maybe Rocket Sanders as well.
Yeah, I'm really not that jacked up about the Browns' run game without Quinshon Judkins. It wasn't a good run game with him. But because Dylan Sampson could legitimately come in here and catch 6 to 8 passes in this game.
Yep.
I think he makes, for like any sort of PPR league, would make himself interesting in that one. Like the Steelers front seven against the Browns, that could necessitate getting the football out pretty quick for Shedeur Sanders there. Okay, let's go to wide receiver here. We've got 4 interesting names to discuss.
Yeah, we're going through these quick because we're talking about fantasy championship pickups, right? If you've made it to the fantasy championship, you know what you're doing. You're not really digging too deep necessarily, although there were a lot of injuries this week. But at receiver, Troy Franklin, he's facing the Chiefs, and Pat Bryant, really scary situation there. Let's hope he's okay. But we know whenever Bryant's out of the lineup, that opens things up for Franklin, and it really looks like Pat Bryant is not going to be back this season, or at least in the next couple weeks. So Franklin, 6 for 85 and a touchdown, 4 for 66. Those are his last 2 performances here, and the Chiefs defense looks like they've just packed it up on the season. So Franklin, a wide receiver 3 flex option. Parker Washington, who we talked about earlier, had the really big game. I don't think you could chase those kind of numbers, but I think he can be that wide receiver 4 flex option for you. Luther Burden, I think you should stash. I don't know if he's going to come back and actually play this week, but we saw him performing pretty well before he got hurt. So if he can get back on the practice field, if he gets out there in this game, he's a wide receiver 3 flex option potentially. And then Jalen Coker, we throw him in there. We like to put a 4th one. We love Jalen Coker. He's doing well here. You know, his last 3 games, 4 for 74 and a touchdown, 4 for 16 a touchdown. This week, a little lower, 3 for 47, but he's producing. He's showing that he can be a meaningful part of that offense, and he can sneak into fantasy lineups in that wide receiver 4 flex range as well.
Yeah, you don't need that last roster spot. Just stick Jalen Coker on the end of your bench and get him a fantasy title. You know, that's what I'm going to be doing for my fantasy championship roster. See if he's on the waiver wire. I want him to get a ceremonial win here. But I would say for the other 3 guys, I'll just give you a quick kind of ranking on these players. I'd probably go, let's assume Burden plays. I think Troy Franklin is the clear best option. I trust the most that he's going to be on the field. I like the matchup there for him. He's been productive, as you mentioned, without Pat Bryant. A little bit tough between Parker Washington and Luther Burden, but I think I'd go Luther Burden, then Parker Washington, just kind of thinking about how both offenses are really crowded. But yeah, I do think that Burden, if he is back, pretty good matchup against that Niners team, and his explosiveness has certainly been evident of late.
Yeah, definitely. And we can keep moving here to tight end too. There's not a lot we have to talk about. Brenton Strange, Dalton Schultz, colston Loveland. One of the exciting things is that we don't have to talk about Harold Fannin. Finally, he's over that 50% rostered mark. So yeah, we did it, Harmon. It took till week 17, but we did it. Taysom Hill is that one player that I think people could consider this week. We talked about it earlier in the show. Audric Estime leads the backfield with 58% of the snaps. But Hill was really the guy that they were using in that game plan, the jack of all trades, 12 carries, 42 yards, catches 4 passes for 36 yards, and then also throws that 38-yard touchdown. And that was after, like I said earlier, only top 3 fantasy points once in all the prior games this season. So kind of out of nowhere, but nice to see him performing. And given the state of the tight end position, it's going to be pretty tough to not rank him as a top 12 option in fantasy this week. So pay attention. My rankings will come out on Tuesday where I actually end up putting him, but I feel like he's going to be inside that top 12 and somebody that he's always boom or bust. He's always volatile, but you could certainly consider him.
And I will just offer the people a personal apology for the folks who followed my ranking on Colson Loveland last week. I was really excited about Loveland without Burden and Odunze, and it just really didn't happen. He ran a route on 81% of the dropbacks, which is good for your route participation fantasy leagues, but otherwise 3 catches for 30 yards. Not a ton there, which was certainly a bummer for Colson Loveland. I started Colson Loveland, so I folled my own bad advice. It ended up okay. Team still won, so don't worry about it. But yeah, I certainly don't like looking. I certainly don't like looking at. I actually made the choice between Colson Loveland and Brenton Strange, and I picked incorrectly. So I'll probably be going back to Strange this next week, which means Colson Loveland will have the big week in week 17. That's just how it goes. Okay, let's finish it up with a deep stash. First time ever in the deep stash category here, Justin Boone. Let's hear it.
Yeah, we got to make history here in the final week of the waiver wire section. Charlie Smith at the Titans. This is the Saints kicker that I am talking about. This is not a 4th string running back who's going to get a starting opportunity. No, we're going with a kicker here. This dude has been nails the last couple of weeks, right? 10 points in week 15, 20 points in week 16. He's the number 1 fantasy kicker on the week with just Monday Night Football left to go, and he gets another great matchup in week 17. The Titans, they're a plus spot for kickers, but they have also given up more than 10 fantasy points in 5 of their last 7 games when it comes to kickers. So don't be surprised if he is a factor again. You could look to pick him up, and he is available in 99% of leagues. So consider grabbing him as your kicker this week.
Look at that. We've made history here on the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast waiver wire selection. Finally have talked about a kicker right here. We got it in at the deadline.